These Liberals like to try and call this a generational budget. And I guess if you look at the generations of young Canadians it's going to take to pay off the massive deficit in this year's budget and the accumulated debt after 10 years of this Liberal government, it is in fact generational because it will take generations of Canadians to try and make a dent in paying it off. All of the debt that was accumulated from 1867 till 2015, these Liberals have managed to double in 10 years. Think about that for a second. All the debt accumulated from every government from 1867 to 2015, they more than doubled in the last 10 years. And that is a debt that is going to have to be repaid by who? Young Canadians, generations of young Canadians who are going to suffer through either higher taxes, higher inflation, higher interest rates, all the things that come with this excess spending by this Liberal government. If you also want to talk about a generational budget, this generational budget has delivered generational job losses. If you look at the job losses in the auto sector, the job losses in the steel sector, we just had the announcement of 1,000 job losses yesterday in the steel sector. This as a result of specific policies and decisions made by this government. Or if you look at the generational devastation in the softwood lumber industry, which this government has been unable to resolve in 8 years of government. If you recall, under the government of Stephen Harper, the softwood lumber dispute was resolved within 6 months of that government taking office. Now we're looking at 8 years, and we're looking at tens of thousands of jobs lost, mills closed, etc. Now, if you also look at generational opportunities for corruption, then this budget is also generational. They've decided that the best way to spur the Canadian economy is to set up a special office, and the Prime Minister will pick certain projects that will get this special status. You know, these are the people that brought us the We Charity scandal, the Green Slush Fund, and many other scandals over the past years. All of these things have been a boon to Liberal insiders who get rich on these schemes. So these are three ways in which I guess this budget is generational, but generationally bad, and it will cause generations of damage to the country I love and all Conservatives love. So let's talk a little bit about some of those specifics. We now have 1,000 job layoffs in the steel industry, in addition to other layoffs that have happened in the steel industry over the course of this government. They're going to say, oh yes, but it's these tariffs that are caused by President Trump in the United States. Sure, that's one factor, and it'd be great if that would be resolved, but we have a Prime Minister who said, like, who cares? That's boring. So if you wonder why we haven't actually solved the trade dispute with the United States, which has now caused 1,000 job layoffs in the steel industry, it's because we have a Prime Minister who so casually says, who cares? That's boring. Well, that's the result. This is the result of who cares, that's boring when you're talking about our largest trading partner. But it doesn't stop there. Look at what's happening in the auto industry. We've now lost the production at the Brampton assembly plant, and others could be facing the same fate because, once again, the tariffs that are put on our auto sector by President Trump have not been resolved by this Prime Minister. Now, some of us might recall it was this Prime Minister said that he'd have a deal by July 21st. Last time I checked my calendar, we're quite past July 21st. But again, I go back to when the Prime Minister says, who cares, that's boring, when asked about whether or not he's met with President Trump to resolve the tariffs, you might understand why they blew past July 21st and we're now into December with no resolution on these things. And if you even want to talk about the softwood lumber industry, this has been devastating, absolutely devastating for communities across the country. Again, this has not been resolved in 8 years. From Justin Trudeau, who did absolutely nothing to resolve the softwood lumber dispute, we now have our Prime Minister who says, who cares, that's boring. But wait a minute, that was just with respect to the tariffs that the President recently put on steel, aluminum, and autos. I don't think softwood lumber even reaches the issue plate for him. Like, it's even below who cares, that's boring. And that's what he's saying to all those families, all those communities that rely on these industries. Who cares, that's boring. Now, one thing I do want to comment on is that the Liberal Industry Minister has stood up many times and said there's a jobs guarantee in these contracts. Now, I got the opportunity to sit in on the Ogo community and look at these contracts. Now, I can't speak about the specifics of those contracts because they cannot be released. But what I can say is this. If I had drafted a contract like that when I was in second-year law school for a project, I would have got an F. And this is the Government of Canada that's allegedly signing a contract for $15 billion to give to a corporation. If I'd turned in that contract in second-year law school, my contracts professor would have given me an F. And that's what you get with these guys. You don't actually get things that are good for the Canadian economy. So let's talk about the second generational thing about this budget, the generational debt that they are going to be adding on to every single Canadian. $78 billion this year, although the PBO estimates that would be even higher. And as I said earlier, we've actually gone from a debt that successive governments from 1867 to 2015, that's one chunk of debt. From 2015 to 2025, they doubled it. I mean, think about that. Let that sink in. What it took over 100 years to accumulate, they doubled in 10 years. And what constituents in my riding, the voters in my riding say to me all the time, they'll say, you know, Kyle, what's better? What's actually better after all of this spending? Is healthcare better? No, we have waiting lists that are absolutely and completely unacceptable. And we now spend more money on interest on the debt. That's like making the minimum payment on your credit card. We pay more money servicing the interest on the debt than we do health transfers to the province. This is the effect of piling on generational debt onto Canadians and the next generation of Canadians. These are significant problems. But what else is better? Are our armed forces better equipped? No, they're not. Is the cost of living less? No, it isn't. Is it easier to buy a house? No, it's not. Are our roads less congested? No, they are not. So when you think about doubling the national debt in 10 years, and then you ask Canadians if anything's better, and their answer is, I can't think that anything is better, you have to ask yourself, what the heck did these guys do with all this money? We get dribs and drabs of this. We had a great intervention by a Conservative member looking at some of the spending envelopes recently, talking about how they were something about gender barracks in Lebanese ski school, $4 million. Like, if Canadians actually looked at where they're spending money, they would be 100% horrified. Now, I briefly talked about generational corruption because rather than creating an even playing field, creating economic zones where the best companies get to, put forward their ideas and compete to try and get through a streamlined process, the streamlined environmental process, these guys decided the way to do it is to handpick projects. And lo and behold, who's getting some of this project money? Brookfield. And so how much more money is Brookfield going to get with backroom insider deals with this Liberal government? I guess we're going to have to wait and see, because that's what they've decided to do. And what's actually even more scary is this. The CEO of Brookfield testified at committee and said, every time Brookfield does well, the Prime Minister does financially well because of his enormous shareholdings in Brookfield. And so what did they do? They set up a projects office where they hand-pick the projects. Can you imagine the backroom dealing that's going to go on to get those projects bumped up the list? The Green Slush Fund is going to look like small potatoes at the end of what's happening with the Special Projects Office, because the well-known insiders will know who to talk to, what to do to sneak their little projects up the list so people get rich. Who's going to get rich? Liberal insiders. And this is one of the reasons why we absolutely have to oppose this budget. Generational debt, generational job losses, generational corruption. We're voting against this budget.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when we talk about investments, whether it's the National School Investment Program our food program. You could talk about pharmacare. You could talk about the dental program. You could talk about the hundreds of millions that have been invested in Canadians through apprenticeship programs. There are many things in which we have recognized as investing in Canadians is a good thing. The Conservatives, on the other hand, want to stand by and do nothing. And when they talk about deficit, Mr. Speaker, it's important to recognize that the highest deficit was actually when their leader of the Conservative Party sat in caucus in 2009. So they have no idea in terms of what deficit and how you can use deficit financing to the betterment of the country. My question to the member is, does he regret the fact that his leader under Stephen Harper had the highest deficit when you value the Canadian dollar to 2000?
The member for Dufferin-Caledon.
It's just patently false, number one. Nothing approaches the deficit that these guys ran in 2021 and 2022. Nothing approaches that. But let's talk about, they talk about things like dental care, they talk about things like a food program, and that's great. I'm glad that people who can't afford dental care can get some dental care. I'm glad that some families that can't afford to feed their children will get some food in a school food program. But the result of that has been, the result of their economic mismanagement, their economic vandalism, is 8 million visits to the food bank last year. Think about that. This is outrageous. What they're doing with all their spending is they are driving the vast majority of Canadians into food poverty, where they have to go to the food bank, and then they create a couple of programs and try and pat themselves on the back. Actually, what you have to do is make food affordable for all Canadians, something they've failed miserably on.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
The honourable member for Rimouski-Verchères. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Congratulations to my colleague for his speech. Of course, we agree with we don't agree with everything he says. That's why we're not in the same party. But the question I have for him is with respect to the vitality of our media in Quebec. I think they should be seeing similar issues across the country. And with the current legislation that we're studying, the Liberal government has just officially abolished the tax on digital services, which should have helped to fund our media, which are really struggling right now. And in the meantime, rather than helping media, which is already suffering, they're giving money once again, $150 million to Radio-Canada. So what does my colleague think about the Liberals who think the only media that's worth investing in is Radio-Canada and the others get nothing? I'd like to thank my colleague for his question.
Service tax is one of the most embarrassing debacles of this Liberal government, and they've had many. So they were warned repeatedly that this was going to be a major trade irritant with the United States. When I traveled down to the United States as the Shadow Minister for International Trade, I was repeatedly told by every congressman, every senator that I met with, that the digital services tax was going to cause a huge problem in the relationship between Canada and the United States. They went ahead anyway and imposed the digital services tax, which of course worsened the relationship between Canada and the United States. But then to make it worse, they just abandoned it for nothing, like absolutely nothing in the negotiations with President Trump. It's really quite pathetic.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my question to my colleague is, I was talking to a financial advisor, and he pointed out to me that the two of the best performing stocks in the last year, especially since this Prime Minister took office, number one, Dollarama. I think that speaks to the challenges Canadians are having, but at 55% return. Number two, Brookfield, 54% return in the last year alone. So could the member expand about just the struggle Canadians are facing, which speaks to why a specific dollar store is doing so well, and number two, why Brookfield's doing so well?
The honourable member for Dufferin-Caledon in 30 seconds or less.
I'm not a stock expert, but stocks go up for a variety of reasons. So number one, Dollarama is going up because Canadians are finding themselves squeezed. It's amazing how these Liberals never acknowledge it. They get up every day in the House of Commons and talk like Canada's going through the biggest economic boom since post-World War II. They're so out of touch with reality. The reality is Canadians can't make ends meet. They're going to the dollar store. But the other thing that drives stocks sometimes is speculation. And people are speculating that Brookfield is going to get a lot more out of this Liberal government because they have repeatedly in the last few months. Contract, Brookfield.